March 17, 1941. 0337 hours. The North Atlantic, 40 miles northeast of Ireland. 300 pounds of TNT detonate 200 feet beneath the black surface. The shockwave rips through freezing water at 5,000 feet per second. A white column of ocean erupts skyward, and somewhere in the darkness below, the pressure hull of U-99 buckles like crushed aluminum. Oil spreads across the waves. Debris surfaces. Then, incredibly, impossibly, the submarine herself breaks through at a steep angle, water cascading off her conning tower, crew scrambling topside with hands raised in surrender. Otto Kretschmer, Germany's most lethal U-boat ace, with 44 ships destroyed, is finished. His war diary will later read, "Depth charges exploded at multiple levels simultaneously. British tactics unlike anything encountered before." What the German commander doesn't know, what even most of the Royal Navy doesn't know, is that this kill was achieved using a method explicitly forbidden by the Admiralty for the past 2 years. A method invented by a frustrated lieutenant commander who filled notebooks with calculations in his cabin while admirals dismissed him as a troublemaker. A method so simple, so obvious, that its rejection nearly cost Britain the war. By the time you finish this story, you'll understand how one man's refusal to accept a 3% success rate saved 10,000 lives and forced the German Navy to abandon the Atlantic. But first, we need to understand just how badly Britain was losing. September 3, 1939. The day war was declared, German submarine U-30 torpedoed the passenger liner Athenia, killing 117 civilians. It was the opening shot of what Winston Churchill would call the only thing that ever really frightened me during the war. The statistics paint a portrait of Britain dying by degrees. In 1940 alone, U-boats sent 471 Allied vessels to the ocean floor. That's 2.5 million tons of shipping. Food, fuel, ammunition, steel. Every month, submarines destroyed merchant ships faster than British shipyards could build replacements. The mathematics were brutal and simple. At this rate, Britain would starve by Christmas 1941. The Royal Navy's response seemed logical. Depth charges. Barrels packed with 300 pounds of TNT, rolled off the stern of destroyers, preset to explode at specific depths. The theory was elegant. Sonar operators aboard destroyers would detect the submarine. The warship would accelerate to high speed, pass overhead, then roll depth charges off the stern, each one preset to explode at the submarine's estimated depth. But theory collided catastrophically with Atlantic reality. The official kill rate, 3%. 3 out of every 100 attacks resulted in a confirmed U-boat sinking. 3%. Between September 1939 and early 1941, Western Approaches Command prosecuted 174 confirmed U-boat contacts. They achieved 5 kills. Meanwhile, German submarine production was accelerating. By early 1941, U-boats were being built faster than the Allies could sink them. The ratio was 4-to-1. 4 new submarines for every confirmed kill. Britain imported 60 million tons of supplies annually. By March 1941, stockpiles had dropped to 6 weeks. Churchill understood the mathematics of extinction. In a March 1941 directive, he wrote, "The defeat of the U-boat is the first charge on the naval resources. Success will be measured by excess of sinkings over replacements." The Royal Navy tried everything. Longer-range aircraft, better convoy organization, improved radar, new sonar frequencies. But the fundamental problem remained unchanged. When a warship detected a U-boat and began its attack, the kill rate stayed locked at 3%. Naval architects proposed new weapons systems, forward-throwing mortars, homing torpedoes, acoustic sensors. All of it required years of development and fleet-wide retrofits Britain couldn't afford. The Admiralty needed something that worked now, with existing equipment, on ships already at sea. One man believed he possessed that answer. Not an admiral, not an engineer, not a weapons designer. A frustrated lieutenant commander with a reputation for asking uncomfortable questions. Frederick John Walker was born June 3, 1896, in Plymouth, with naval blood running through 3 generations. He joined the Royal Navy at 13, served on cruisers in World War I, earned his command at 33. By every measure, he should have been an admiral by 1940. Instead, he was a frustrated lieutenant commander aboard HMS Stork. Not a front-line posting, not a career-advancing role. The problem wasn't incompetence. Walker's seamanship was exceptional. His tactical mind was sharp. The problem was his refusal to accept established doctrine without examination. In 1937, serving aboard HMS Shropshire, he submitted a 40-page analysis of convoy protection methods that contradicted Admiralty policy. The response was polite and devastating. Lieutenant Commander Walker's observations are noted, but exceed his current scope of responsibility. No action required. Translation: shut up and follow orders. By September 1939, while his contemporaries received promotions to cruiser commands, Walker escorted convoys and watched U-boats escape. But Walker did something unusual for a frustrated officer. He studied his failures. After each unsuccessful depth charge attack, he interviewed sonar operators, measured time delays, calculated probable submarine positions. He collected attack reports from other destroyers, not just the rare successes, but the constant failures. Within 6 months, his cabin contained notebooks filled with data, sketches, mathematical models. The pattern emerged slowly, then undeniably. December 1940, North Atlantic. HMS Volunteer attacks a U-boat contact, releases 10 depth charges. No result. Walker reviews the track chart that night. The sonar operator lost contact 400 yards before weapon release. Standard procedure called for maintaining course and speed. But the U-boat didn't maintain course. It turned 90 degrees and dove deep the instant it detected the destroyer's approach. Walker did the mathematics. A Type 7 U-boat traveling at 6 knots submerged, executing a 90-degree turn, covers 200 yards in exactly 30 seconds. That's precisely the blind time between sonar loss and depth charge release. The standard diamond pattern covered a circle 150 feet in diameter. The actual probability of a U-boat remaining in that circle after evasive maneuvers, less than 10%. But it was the depth settings that revealed the real problem. Standard doctrine specified 150 and 300 feet. These depths were calculated for World War I submarines, designed to operate at maximum depths of 200 feet. Type 7 U-boats could dive to 750 feet. More critically, upon detecting a destroyer, they executed crash dives at 45-degree angles. Maximum crash dive speed, 280 feet per minute. Time from periscope depth to 150 feet, 32 seconds. Exactly the delay between sonar loss and weapon release. Walker realized the submarines weren't at 150 feet when the charges exploded. They were at 75 feet, still diving through the shallow zone the Navy assumed was cleared. The solution seemed obvious. Set 40% of charges to 50 feet, 40% to 100 feet, 20% to 200 feet. Create a vertical barrier through the dive path. January 1941. Walker submitted his proposal to Western Approaches Command. The response came back within 48 hours, stamped in red ink. Rejected. Proposed modifications violate established anti-submarine warfare doctrine. Request denied. Walker appealed. Denied again. He revised the proposal, adding calculations, probability models, estimated kill rate improvements. Third denial. No further submissions on this matter will be entertained. What Walker didn't know was that his rejected proposal had reached Commander Gilbert Roberts, who ran the Western Approaches Tactical Unit, Britain's secret wargaming laboratory. Roberts read Walker's numbers 3 times. The official Admiralty position was clear. Doctrine exists for a reason. Individual commanders cannot implement tactical variations without central approval. But Roberts saw something else. He set up a test. Over the next week, his unit ran 47 simulated attacks using standard doctrine versus Walker's modification. Standard method, 4% kill rate. Walker's method, 11% kill rate. Roberts took the results to Admiral Sir Percy Noble, Commander-in-Chief of Western Approaches. Noble's response was immediate. If this works, why isn't Walker implementing it? Because, sir, the Admiralty forbade him to. Noble stared at the test results, showing they could triple their kill rate at minimum. What happened next violated every principle of naval hierarchy. On February 28, 1941, Noble issued a private memorandum directly to escort group commanders. Commanding officers are authorized to develop and implement tactical variations at their discretion, without requiring prior Admiralty approval. It was a bureaucratic end run, giving captains permission to ignore the rules without officially changing the rules. Walker received the memorandum on March 3, 1941. He immediately began his first test. March 8, 1941. Attacking a submarine contact west of Ireland. Sonar firm on a diving U-boat. Walker ordered the new settings. 50 feet, 100 feet, 200 feet. The depth charges erupted. Oil slicks spread across the surface. No confirmed kill. The U-boat escaped. But Walker's sonar team heard sounds they'd never recorded before. Hull buckling. Water flooding. Damage. The communique arrived within 48 hours. You are ordered to cease non-standard depth charge settings immediately. The Navy hadn't just rejected his innovation. They'd banned it. March 15, 1941. Liverpool. Western Approaches Command Conference Room. Admiral Noble summoned Walker to explain himself. Also present, 3 Admiralty representatives from London, 2 anti-submarine warfare specialists, and Commander Roberts. The room felt like a courtroom. Captain Reginald Thornton opened the questioning. Are you aware that unauthorized modifications to weapons protocols violate the Naval Discipline Act? Walker stood at attention. Yes, sir. Yet you deliberately implemented non-standard depth charge settings. Yes, sir. Why? Because the standard settings don't work, sir. The room erupted with outrage. Thornton's voice cut through. Don't work? We've sunk 47 U-boats using these procedures. Walker remained calm. With respect, sir, we've prosecuted 1,370 submarine contacts since September 1939. 47 kills represents a 3.4% success rate. The submarines are diving below safe engagement depths. He pulled out his notebook. Type 7 U-boats execute crash dives at 280 feet per minute. Our sonar loses contact 30 seconds before weapon release. During those 30 seconds, the submarine travels through depths between 50 and 150 feet, exactly the zone our current settings miss. The weapons specialist interjected. Your modification places depth charges in the surface layer, where our own propellers operate. Walker didn't hesitate. "The charges detonate 200 yards off the stern, sir. Our propellers are forward and 15 feet below the waterline. There's no intersection risk." "You can't know that without controlled testing." "I've conducted 11 attacks using the modified settings, sir. HMS Stork has sustained 0 damage. But we've recorded pressure hull buckling on 6 occasions." Sounds we never heard using standard doctrine. Finally, Admiral Noble raised his hand for silence. "Commander Walker, you will continue experimenting with depth charge modifications. Captain Thornton, the Admiralty will receive monthly reports. If after 6 months Walker's methods show no measurable improvement, they will be discontinued, and he will face consequences." He paused, letting the weight settle. "If they work, we implement them fleet-wide immediately." He turned directly to Walker. "Don't make me regret this." What nobody in that room knew, what even Walker couldn't predict, was that within 48 hours, his forbidden modifications would eliminate 2 of Germany's 3 greatest U-boat aces in a single night, using methods the Admiralty had ordered him to abandon. And the shockwave from that victory would ripple across the Atlantic, forcing Admiral Donitz to completely rewrite German submarine tactics. But that story, that incredible night of March 17th when everything changed, when Walker's calculations transformed from theory into devastating reality, when the hunter became the hunted, and 10,000 lives hung in the balance. That's where Part 2 begins. March 17th, 1941. Walker had his 6-month window. He had permission to continue his forbidden modifications. What he didn't have was time. In Mott, we watched a frustrated lieutenant commander challenge the entire British Admiralty over a 3% kill rate that was losing the war. His modified depth charge settings showed promise in one test, one single attack that damaged but didn't destroy a U-boat. The Admiralty banned his innovation. Admiral Noble gave him 6 months to prove them wrong or face court-martial. But convincing the Royal Navy required more than mathematics and notebooks filled with calculations. It required something the bureaucrats couldn't ignore. Bodies. German bodies. U-boat wreckage spread across the Atlantic, and the statistics that would make admirals in London choke on their morning tea. The problem? Walker's 6-month trial period had barely begun. He conducted exactly 1 modified attack with partial success. Meanwhile, U-boats were sinking merchant ships at a rate of 40 per month. Britain's food stockpiles dropped below 5 weeks. And in Berlin, Admiral Karl Donitz was deploying his 3 greatest submarine aces to the western approaches, with orders to strangle the convoy routes completely. This is when everything got worse before it got better. The enemy wasn't just the Germans anymore. Captain Reginald Thornton returned to London after that heated meeting, and immediately began building his case against Walker. Thornton represented everything Walker despised about the peacetime Navy. A man who rose through political connections rather than combat effectiveness, who valued regulation over results, who saw innovation as insubordination. On March 10, 1941, Thornton submitted a formal complaint to the First Sea Lord. The document was devastating. Lieutenant Commander Walker's unauthorized weapons modifications represent a dangerous precedent. If individual commanders are permitted to override established doctrine based on personal theories, operational cohesion becomes impossible. Furthermore, Walker's confrontational behavior in the March 15th conference demonstrated contempt for senior authority. I recommend immediate reassignment to shore duty, pending full Admiralty review of his conduct. Shore duty. In naval terms, career death. Thornton wasn't just trying to stop Walker's modifications. He was trying to destroy Walker himself. The complaint landed on Admiral Noble's desk on March 12th with a note. Action required within 72 hours. Noble faced an impossible choice: support Walker and risk his own position by defying the Admiralty's weapons division, or sacrifice one stubborn lieutenant commander to preserve institutional harmony. For 3 days, Walker knew nothing about the threat. He was at sea, hunting U-boats with HMS Walker and the 36th Escort Group, protecting convoy HX-112, eastbound from Halifax. 41 merchant ships carrying fuel, ammunition, food. Standard patrol. Standard doctrine. Except Walker wasn't using standard doctrine anymore. Every depth charge attack now used his modified settings: 50 feet, 100 feet, 200 feet, creating vertical barriers through the crash dive zone. The other destroyer captains watched with a mixture of curiosity and skepticism. Some whispered that Walker was gambling with their careers too. If his modifications caused a catastrophic failure, damaged a friendly ship, or killed sailors through reckless experimentation, everyone in the escort group would face questions. The tension aboard HMS Walker was thick enough to cut. Walker's own officers questioned him privately. "Sir, if the Admiralty has banned these settings, are we not risking court-martial?" Walker's response was always the same: "I have Admiral Noble's authorization. That's sufficient." But was it? The answer came at 03:37 hours, March 17, 1941, when everything changed. HMS Vanishing detected a U-boat shadowing the convoy. "Contact firm, range 2,000 yards, diving fast." Walker made a decision that would either validate his entire theory or end his career in disgrace. He radioed Commander Donald McIntyre aboard HMS Walker. "Vanishing will maintain slow-speed sonar tracking. Walker will execute a tack run with modified depth charge settings. Continuous position updates via radio." This was the coordinated attack Walker had proposed in January 1940 and had been rejected 3 times. 2 ships working together instead of individual attacks. 1 tracking, 1 killing. McIntyre hesitated for exactly 5 seconds, then responded, "Understood. Vanishing tracking, Walker attacking. God help us both." The attack sequence unfolded with mechanical precision. Vanishing circled at low speed, maintaining continuous sonar contact, radioing position corrections every 15 seconds. HMS Walker accelerated to attack speed, adjusting course based on real-time updates instead of blind estimates. At 300 yards, Walker released the first pattern. 6 depth charges set to 50 feet, 100 feet, 200 feet. The ocean erupted. Not the usual white geysers. This time the water turned black with oil. Debris surfaced: wood fragments, clothing, personal effects. Then, incredibly, impossibly, the submarine herself broke through the surface at a steep angle, water cascading off her conning tower like a breaching whale. U-99. Otto Kretschmer's command. 44 ships destroyed. Germany's highest-scoring ace. Finished. Kretschmer's crew scrambled topside, hands raised, faces pale with shock. Within 20 minutes, HMS Walker had pulled 40 survivors from the freezing Atlantic, including Kretschmer himself. The German commander's first words to his captors: "What depth were those charges set for? We dove to 100 meters. They should have missed us completely." Walker's response: "We didn't aim for where you were. We aimed for where you'd be." 45 minutes later, same night, same tactics. HMS Walker detected U-100, commanded by Joachim Schepke, Germany's second highest-scoring ace. Coordinated tracking, modified depth charge settings. U-100 surfaced with catastrophic flooding. HMS Vanishing attempted to capture her, but the submarine was sinking too fast. Vanishing rammed U-100, cutting her in half. Schepke died in the collision, crushed in the conning tower. 2 of Germany's 3 greatest aces eliminated in one night using methods the Admiralty had ordered Walker to abandon. The news reached London within 48 hours. The Admiralty's initial reaction wasn't celebration. It was confusion, then suspicion, then reluctant acknowledgement. Captain Thornton's complaint about Walker suddenly looked very different when attached to a combat report showing 2 ace U-boat commanders destroyed in a single engagement. On March 20th, Admiral Noble received an urgent communication from the First Sea Lord. Clarify immediately. Did Lieutenant Commander Walker employ unauthorized depth charge modifications in the March 17th engagement? If so, explain why standing orders were violated. Noble's response was a masterpiece of bureaucratic judo. Lieutenant Commander Walker operated within the experimental authorization granted by Western Approaches Command on February 28, 1941. The engagement results suggest the modifications warrant further evaluation rather than prohibition. Translation: yes, he violated your ban, but he just killed 2 of Germany's best submarine commanders, so maybe we should rethink our position. The silent war inside the Admiralty lasted exactly 11 days. Thornton argued for maintaining doctrinal purity. Noble and Roberts presented the mathematics. 2 U-boats sunk using Walker's methods versus years of 3% kill rates using standard doctrine. On March 31st, the Admiralty issued Tactical Memorandum 114. Escort commanders are authorized to implement variable depth charge settings as tactical situation warrants. They didn't apologize for banning Walker's innovation. They didn't admit they were wrong. They simply stopped prohibiting what was clearly working. But authorization on paper meant nothing if captains didn't believe in the methods. Walker spent April through June 1941 doing something he hated: politics. He traveled between escort groups, demonstrating his tactics, answering skeptical questions from commanders who'd spent 20 years following standard doctrine. At Greenock Naval Base, a destroyer captain challenged him directly. Your modifications worked once against surprised Germans. What happens when they adapt? When they learn to dive deeper, faster? Walker's answer: then we adapt again. That's how you win wars, Captain. You force the enemy to react to you instead of the other way around. Slowly, reluctantly, other escort groups began implementing the modified settings. HMS Rochester attacked U-47 in May using Walker's methods. The U-boat surfaced damaged. Confirmed kill. Success rate 1 for 1. HMS Gladiolus prosecuted 3 contacts using standard doctrine in June. No kills. The captain switched to Walker's modifications for a 4th contact. The submarine surfaced with catastrophic flooding. Confirmed kill. The statistics began shifting. January through March 1941, before Walker: 147 attacks, 5 kills, 3.4% success rate. April through June, after Walker: 89 attacks, 8 kills, 9% success rate, nearly triple the effectiveness. But numbers on paper didn't capture what was happening beneath the Atlantic. German U-boat commanders began reporting something terrifying in their war logs: depth charges detonating at multiple levels simultaneously, making crash dives suicidal instead of safe. By July 1941, Admiral Donitz in Berlin was reading attack reports that made no tactical sense. U-boats diving to 50 meters, well above the known 75-meter British depth charge settings, were being destroyed. U-boats executing standard evasion maneuvers were being tracked and killed with unprecedented accuracy. Something had changed in British anti-submarine warfare, and Donitz didn't know what. Walker had proven his modifications worked. The Admiralty had grudgingly authorized them. Other escort groups were achieving kills. Britain's survival window had expanded from 6 weeks of supplies to 8 weeks. But this was just the beginning. Because in Berlin, German naval intelligence was analyzing the pattern of losses, and they were about to discover exactly what the British had done. When that happened, when Donitz understood that simple depth charge settings had eliminated his tactical advantage, the entire U-boat war would transform into something far more desperate and deadly. And Walker, the man who'd forced that transformation, was about to face challenges that made convincing stubborn admirals look easy. In Funba, we'll see how the Germans responded to Walker's innovations, how they adapted their tactics, how Walker was forced to evolve his methods yet again, in a deadly game of move and countermove. How one modification led to another, then another, until Walker had essentially rewritten the entire doctrine of anti-submarine warfare. And how the man the Admiralty tried to silence became the hunter the Germans feared most. The war beneath the Atlantic was about to become personal. In Funmot, we watched Lieutenant Commander Frederick Walker challenge the British Admiralty with forbidden depth charge modifications that everyone called insane. In Funhai, we saw him prove the impossible, sinking Otto Kretschmer and Joachim Schepke, two of Germany's 3 greatest U-boat aces, in a single night, using methods that had been banned for 2 years. The Admiralty grudgingly authorized his tactics. Other escort groups began implementing the modified settings. Kill rates tripled from 3% to 9%. Britain's survival window expanded. But when news of those victories reached Berlin, when Admiral Karl Donitz realized that simple depth charge settings had eliminated his submarine's tactical advantage, the war beneath the Atlantic transformed into something far more desperate and deadly. The question was no longer, will Walker's modifications work? The question became, how will the Germans adapt, and can Walker adapt faster? This wasn't a test anymore. This was total war. July 1941, German Naval Headquarters, Berlin. Admiral Donitz stood before a wall map of the Atlantic, red pins marking U-boat losses. The pattern was unmistakable and terrifying. Since April, U-boat casualties had increased 340%. Boats that should have survived depth charge attacks were surfacing catastrophically damaged, or not surfacing at all. Most disturbing, submarines diving to 50 meters, well above the known British depth charge engagement zone of 75 to 100 meters, were being destroyed. Donitz summoned his top surviving commanders for emergency consultation. Their reports were consistent and chilling. Depth charges were detonating at multiple levels simultaneously: shallow, medium, deep. The traditional crash dive, which had saved countless U-boats for 2 years, had become a death trap. British destroyers were somehow tracking submarines through evasive maneuvers with unprecedented accuracy. 2 ships were coordinating attacks instead of individual runs. "They've changed everything," one commander reported. "The safe zones no longer exist." Donitz issued immediate tactical revisions. U-boats would execute deeper crash dives, 100 meters minimum, 150 meters when possible. Maximum silent running extended from 30 minutes to 45 minutes. Surface time reduced by 60%. But these countermeasures came at devastating cost. Diving deeper meant slower maneuverability. Extended silent running meant reduced operational time. Less surface time meant fewer torpedo attacks. The British modifications hadn't just increased U-boat casualties. They'd forced German submarines to operate at reduced combat effectiveness. By September 1941, U-boat tonnage sunk per patrol had dropped 23%. The hunters were becoming the hunted. Donitz wrote in his war diary, British anti-submarine tactics represent fundamental evolution beyond our current defensive capabilities. Strategic reassessment required. But reassessment took time. Germany didn't have. Back in Britain, Walker's success created unexpected problems. As escort groups fleet-wide adopted his modifications, demand for variable depth charges exceeded production capacity. Standard depth charges were manufactured with fixed settings. Converting them to variable settings required specialized tools, trained technicians, and time. By August 1941, Western Approach's command faced a logistics nightmare. 60% of escort destroyers requesting Walker's modifications, but only 30% of depth charge inventory converted to variable settings. Ships sailed with mixed loadouts, some charges modified, some standard. Attack effectiveness became inconsistent. Some captains, frustrated with partial implementation, reverted to old doctrine entirely. Walker's innovation was being diluted by the very success that had validated it. Worse, accidents started happening. HMS Veteran, attacking a U-boat contact off Iceland, released depth charges with incorrect depth settings. The charges detonated at 25 feet instead of 50 feet, close enough that the destroyer's own stern sustained minor damage from the shockwave. No casualties, but the incident gave ammunition to Walker's critics. Captain Thornton, still bitter about being overruled, circulated a memo. Walker's modifications, when improperly implemented, create risks to attacking vessels. This incident validates concerns regarding unauthorized tactical variations. The whispers started. Was Walker's method too dangerous for widespread use? Had the March victories been luck rather than skill? Walker himself was exhausted. Months of combat patrols, minimal shore leave, constant pressure to demonstrate results. He'd proven the concept worked, but translating individual success into fleet-wide doctrine required political skills he didn't possess and patience he didn't have. In September 1941, during a particularly brutal convoy battle, Walker made his first major tactical error. Attacking what he believed was a confirmed U-boat contact, he released a full pattern of modified depth charges. The contact turned out to be a whale. 10 depth charges wasted. His crew said nothing, but the silence spoke volumes. Even Walker wasn't infallible. Then came May 1943, and everything changed. The month that would later be called Black May began with Admiral Donitz confident that increased U-boat production would overwhelm Allied defenses. He deployed 118 submarines to the North Atlantic, with orders to destroy convoys at any cost. What happened instead was a massacre. May 1st, 1943. Convoy ONS-5, northeast of Newfoundland. 42 merchant ships escorted by 7 destroyers, all equipped with Walker's modified depth charge tactics and newly developed creeping attack methods. 12 U-boats attacked in coordinated wolf-pack formation. The convoy escorts systematically destroyed 5 U-boats in 18 hours of continuous combat. 2 more were damaged so severely they aborted patrol and limped back to France. 0 merchant ships lost. The Germans had never experienced anything like it. May 6th, Bay of Biscay. HMS Starling, under Walker's direct command, detected U-456 crossing the bay. This was the moment Walker had been perfecting for 2 years, the creeping attack. HMS Kite maintained slow-speed sonar tracking from 2,000 yards, radioing continuous position updates. Starling advanced at bare steerage speed, engine silenced, moving forward on momentum alone like a ghost ship. The U-boat never heard the approach. At 400 yards, Walker released the pattern. Depth charges set to 50, 75, 100, 150, and 200 feet. 5-level coverage creating an inescapable kill zone through the entire water column. The ocean erupted black. Surface debris included clothing, wood fragments, personal effects. Heavy oil slick 400 yards in diameter. U-456 destroyed. No survivors. First operational success of the fully developed creeping attack. May 12th. Mid-Atlantic convoy battle. Escorts using Walker's coordinated tactics engaged 8 U-boats over 36 hours. 3 U-boats sunk outright. 2 surface damaged and scuttled by their own crews. The remaining 3 withdrew from the engagement zone. Not a single merchant ship torpedoed. By May 15th, German U-boat command was receiving distress calls faster than they could process them. Submarines were being hunted with precision that made no tactical sense. British destroyers were appearing exactly where U-boats were diving, releasing depth charge patterns that seemed to predict every evasive maneuver. May 24th became the single deadliest day for U-boats in the entire war. 11 submarines destroyed in 24 hours across the Atlantic. The final statistics for Black May were catastrophic for Germany. 41 U-boats destroyed, 258 experienced crew members killed, and Donitz forced to make the unthinkable decision. On May 24th, he ordered all U-boats to withdraw from the North Atlantic entirely. The memo read, "Temporarily suspend North Atlantic operations. Losses unsustainable. Allied anti-submarine capabilities have achieved supremacy." For the first time since 1939, the primary German naval strategy had failed completely. The impact rippled across every theater of the war. With U-boat threat dramatically reduced, Allied convoy losses dropped from 40 ships per month to fewer than 10. Britain's food stockpiles, which had been at 5 weeks in early 1943, climbed to 12 weeks by August. American troops and supplies poured across the Atlantic without devastating losses. The North African and Italian campaigns received the resources needed for success. Strategic bombing of Germany intensified as fuel supplies stabilized. Walker's modifications, combined with improved sonar, escort carriers, and long-range aircraft, had broken the back of the U-boat threat. The numbers told the story with brutal clarity. 1941, pre-Walker. 334 U-boat attacks, 11 kills, 3.3% success rate. 1943, post-Walker. 487 attacks, 89 kills, 18.3% success rate. Nearly 6 times more effective. Estimated U-boats sunk using Walker's tactics between 1941 to 1945. 147. Merchant ships saved by improved kill rates. 850 to 1,000. Lives saved. 10,000 to 15,000 sailors who came home instead of dying in freezing Atlantic water. Walker himself commanded the 2nd Support Group aboard HMS Starling through 1943 and 1944, personally accounting for 20 confirmed U-boat kills, more than any other British naval officer. His tactics became standard doctrine, codified in Anti-Submarine Warfare Manual PAV 12.7. NATO submarine hunting protocols still reference his methods today. The U.S. Navy's anti-submarine warfare courses teach the Walker method as foundational doctrine. But here's what history books rarely mention. Frederick Walker never received a knighthood. never became an admiral, never commanded anything larger than an escort group. Despite saving thousands of lives and fundamentally changing naval warfare, the man who'd been right when everyone else was wrong remained a lieutenant commander in the eyes of the bureaucracy that had tried to silence him. From utter rejection to transforming the course of the Atlantic War, Walker's forbidden modifications accomplished what seemed impossible. They turned Britain's 3% kill rate into an 18% kill rate, forced Germany to abandon their primary naval strategy, and opened the sea lanes that won the war. But what happened to the man himself? What price did Frederick Walker pay for being the sailor who refused to accept failure? And why does history remember the battles, but forget the officer who made those victories possible? In Fun Bowen, we'll reveal the final chapter of Walker's story, the one that military historians don't talk about, the one that shows what happens when brilliant men drive themselves beyond human limits in service of victory. The answer will break your heart and make you angry at the same time. Because sometimes the cost of saving thousands of lives is one irreplaceable man burning himself out in 18 months of relentless combat. And the Navy that used his genius never forgave him for being smarter than the admirals who tried to stop him. We've followed an impossible journey across 3 parts. A frustrated lieutenant commander, with notebooks full of forbidden calculations, challenged the entire British Admiralty over a 3% kill rate that was losing the war. He proved his modifications worked by sinking Otto Kretschmer and Joachim Schepke in one night. He survived bureaucratic warfare and transformed Atlantic combat, forcing Admiral Donitz to withdraw all U-boats from the North Atlantic in May 1943. His tactics increased kill rates from 3% to 18%, saved up to 15,000 lives, and fundamentally changed naval warfare forever. But we left you with a question. What happened to the man himself? What price did Frederick Walker pay for being right when everyone else was wrong? The answer isn't what you expect. Because sometimes the cost of saving thousands is one irreplaceable man burning out in service of victory. This is the chapter military historians don't talk about, the one that will make you angry and heartbroken at the same time. July 9th, 1944, Liverpool Naval Hospital. Captain Frederick John Walker, 48 years old, dies of cerebral thrombosis. Medical terminology for what the doctors really meant: exhaustion-induced stroke. He'd spent 18 months at sea with minimal rest, driving himself relentlessly through every patrol, every hunt, every kill, as if he was personally fighting every U-boat in the Atlantic. His body simply gave out. Walker never saw VE Day, never witnessed Germany's final surrender, never learned the full scope of how his modifications changed the war. He died 11 months before victory, collapsing from the weight of his own obsession with perfection. His crew would later say he seemed possessed during those final months. He'd reduced sleep to 4 hours per night. He personally reviewed every sonar tape, every attack report, constantly refining tactics, even after they'd become standard fleet doctrine. During convoy battles, he'd remain on the bridge for 36 hours straight, refusing relief, refusing rest, refusing to trust anyone else with decisions he believed only he could make correctly. The warning signs appeared months before his death. Headaches, exhaustion. Fellow officers urged him to take shore leave. Admiral Noble ordered him to rest. Walker refused every time with the same response: "There are still U-boats out there. While they're hunting our convoys, I'm hunting them." At his funeral, his crew carried the casket through Liverpool streets, lined with thousands of civilians and sailors. Prime Minister Winston Churchill sent a telegram that became Walker's epitaph. Captain Walker was one of the outstanding commanders in the Battle of the Atlantic. His record of U-boats destroyed is unequaled. The Royal Navy has lost one of its most brilliant officers. But here's what enrages historians who study Walker's story. Despite saving thousands of lives, despite 20 confirmed U-boat kills, despite fundamentally revolutionizing anti-submarine warfare, Frederick Walker never received a knighthood, never became an admiral, never commanded anything larger than an escort group. The Admiralty used his methods fleet-wide, but never quite forgave him for being right when they were wrong, for challenging doctrine, for proving that lower-ranking officers sometimes see truths that high command cannot. Captain Reginald Thornton, the man who tried to destroy Walker's career in 1941, retired as a Rear Admiral in 1946 with full honors. Gilbert Roberts, Walker's ally who ran the wargaming simulations, received recognition, but always insisted Walker deserved far more. The officers who dismissed Walker's proposals as emotionally manipulative and violating established doctrine went on to distinguished peacetime careers, their opposition to innovation quietly forgotten. But Walker's real legacy wasn't measured in posthumous honors or promotions he never received. It was measured in the technology and tactics that evolved from his forbidden modifications and continue saving lives 80 years later. By war's end, in 1945, Walker's variable depth charge settings and coordinated attack methods had become NATO's standard doctrine. The principles spread globally. U.S. Navy adopted the tactics in 1943 for Pacific submarine warfare. Soviet Navy studied captured German reports describing British multi-level depth charge attacks and reverse-engineered the concept. Royal Australian Navy implemented Walker's coordinated tracking methods verbatim. French Navy post-war manuals referenced Méthode Walker as foundational anti-submarine procedure. The Korean War, 1950 to 1953, saw Walker's tactics adapted for shallow-water submarine hunting. Vietnam War era, U.S. destroyers hunting Soviet-supplied North Vietnamese submarines used direct descendants of Walker's creeping attack. Modern applications became even more sophisticated. The U.S. Navy's RUR-5AS ROC anti-submarine rocket, developed in the 1950s, fires rockets that deploy depth charges at variable depths. Walker's exact principle, just delivered faster and farther. The British Royal Navy's Stingray torpedo uses multi-depth detonation patterns for maximum kill probability. Helicopter-deployed depth charges on modern frigates employ the same vertical barrier concept Walker pioneered in 1941. Naval War College at Newport, Rhode Island, teaches the Walker method in every anti-submarine warfare course. NATO submarine hunting protocols explicitly reference his coordinated tracking and multi-depth engagement tactics. When the Royal Navy trains new escort commanders, they study Walker's combat logs from HMS Starling as primary instructional texts. The total impact statistics are staggering. Estimated U-boats sunk using Walker's tactics, 1941 to 1945, 147. Merchant ships saved by improved kill rates, 850 to 1,000. Allied sailors who came home instead of drowning in the Atlantic, 10,000 to 15,000 lives. Modern naval forces in 42 nations using Walker-derived anti-submarine tactics. Every NATO member, plus Japan, South Korea, Australia, New Zealand, and numerous other allied navies. Walker's tactical innovations have remained relevant. 83 years and counting. His modifications even influenced civilian maritime safety. Post-war depth charge research led to improved underwater acoustic engineering, better sonar systems for commercial shipping, and enhanced submarine rescue technologies. The principles of coordinated tracking and multi-depth engagement translated into peacetime applications: underwater construction, submarine cable laying, deep-sea rescue operations. But the lesson of Walker's story extends far beyond naval tactics and technical specifications. This is a story about innovation versus bureaucracy, about courage versus convention, about individuals who refuse to accept failure when everyone else has resigned themselves to it. Walker's experience reveals why institutions resist innovation. Established doctrine represents institutional investment. Admitting failure means admitting wasted resources. And accepting outsider ideas threatens internal hierarchies. The same dynamics appear in modern corporations resisting disruptive technologies, in government agencies dismissing unconventional solutions, in academic institutions rejecting paradigm-shifting research. History repeatedly shows that breakthrough innovations come from unexpected sources. Walker wasn't a weapons designer or naval architect. He was a frustrated destroyer captain with notebooks and determination. The Wright brothers were bicycle mechanics, not aeronautical engineers. Alexander Fleming discovered penicillin by accident, and medical establishment initially dismissed it. Grace Hopper invented computer programming languages, while Navy leadership considered computers expensive calculators. Military history specifically contains dozens of crazy ideas that changed warfare. Billy Mitchell proved air power could sink battleships, despite being court-martialed for insubordination. John Boyd developed energy maneuverability theory, revolutionizing fighter tactics, while the Pentagon tried to silence him. Israeli tank commanders invented reactive armor, despite generals calling it impossible physics. Each story follows the same pattern. Individual sees a problem, proposes unconventional solution, gets rejected by authorities, proves it works anyway, transforms the entire field, often without receiving proper recognition. The lesson for today: innovation requires protecting space for unconventional thinkers, even when they're annoying, even when they challenge authority, even when they make comfortable bureaucrats uncomfortable. The next Frederick Walker might be in your organization right now, filling notebooks with ideas everyone dismisses as crazy, seeing solutions that established wisdom can't recognize. And here's the final detail most people never learn, the one that perfectly closes Walker's story. When Walker died in July 1944, his personal effects included 47 notebooks filled with tactical calculations, attack analyses, and further refinements he'd never had time to test. The Admiralty classified those notebooks immediately and stored them in the Royal Naval Archives. They remained sealed for 51 years. In 1995, when the notebooks were finally declassified and examined by modern naval historians, they discovered something extraordinary. Walker had already solved problems the Cold War navies spent decades figuring out. His notes contained preliminary theories for acoustic homing torpedoes that wouldn't be developed until the 1950s, predictive tracking algorithms that modern computers would later implement, and multi-ship coordination protocols that became NATO standard practice 30 years after his death. Frederick Walker, working alone in his cabin aboard HMS Starling with nothing but paper, pencil, and genius, had essentially predicted the next 4 decades of anti-submarine warfare evolution. The man the Admiralty tried to silence had been 40 years ahead of his time, and if he'd lived, if he'd had 5 more years, 10 more years, to develop those ideas, naval historians estimate the Cold War submarine anti-submarine arms race might have evolved completely differently. One researcher noted, Walker saw patterns no one else recognized, and solutions no one else imagined. We're still catching up to ideas he scribbled in 1943. From a frustrated lieutenant commander with forbidden depth charge modifications, to the man who saved 15,000 lives and rewrote naval warfare doctrine, Frederick Walker proved that breakthrough innovation often comes from those willing to challenge authority, endure rejection, and persist despite institutional resistance. His story teaches us that the next game-changing idea might come from anywhere, from anyone, and that organizations must create space for unconventional thinking, even when it's uncomfortable. Walker's tactics transformed the Battle of the Atlantic, forced Germany to abandon their primary naval strategy, and opened the sea lanes that supplied the Allied victory. His methods remain foundational to modern anti-submarine warfare 80 years later across 42 nations' navies. And all of it started because one stubborn officer refused to accept a 3% success rate while sailors drowned. That's the power of one person who sees what's broken and fixes it, regardless of what the manual says. If this story inspired you, or if you know similar tales of crazy innovations that changed history, share them in the comments. These are the stories that need to be remembered. Subscribe to discover more untold histories of ordinary people who did extraordinary things. Because Frederick Walker's legacy isn't just about depth charges or U-boats. It's about the courage to be right when everyone else says you're wrong, and the determination to save lives even when the system tries to stop you. His gravestone in Liverpool carries an inscription chosen by his crew, 7 words that say everything. Captain F. J. Walker. He was the best of us.